listen to who you are, your soul. Your soul is your guiding light. That is where your truth is. And if it means that things fall out as a result, it's okay, because when you really are tapped into what you need and your soul is, then you have this sense of power that is limitless, and it's your truth, and it's amazing.
Welcome to the GenX Shift podcast, a show for Gen Xers who are navigating some pretty tough transitions and aren't sure how to move forward. I'm your host, Michelle Walter, proud Gen Xer, former lawyer turned entrepreneur, huge Jason Momoa fan, and margarita snob. And I've navigated a lot of transitions in my life, from losing my mom suddenly to a heart attack to starting my own business. But I often did it all on my own because I was too stubborn to ask for help. Now I'm on a mission to give actionable strategies to other Gen Xers so that they can find the confidence, courage, and clarity they need to make a shift. So let's rock and roll. Hey Gen Xers, what's shaking? I'm really glad you're back listening to the podcast this week, because you better buckle up, Buttercup. This is going to be an epic journey for you. I'm bringing you a conversation with my dear friend, Cris Howard. And this is going to be a conversation that takes you on a journey into learning how you can truly listen to your deepest inner voice so that you can set foot down a path that feels like you are finally living into your deepest truth. Now, I met Cris back when we were both doing triathlons, and she was a way better Ironman triathlete than I ever was. She was an elite triathlete. She competed in numerous Ironmans and then qualified for the Kona Ironman World Championship. She was working for 20 years in the biopharmaceutical industry for elite companies, working with Fortune 100 companies. She has a very impressive resume, as she talks about. And her whole life, she struggled with shame, feeling like she was never good enough, having grown up in the South in a very male-dominated culture and family. And trigger warning here, we do talk about body image issues, including her struggle with bulimia and suicidal ideations. So despite her very impressive resume and all of her accomplishments, she never felt like she was good enough. She always felt like she had to prove herself, that she had to live up to these standards of perfection that we get from families, culture, society. And then about a year ago, when she was diagnosed with melanoma, everything started to shift for her. She started realizing how miserable she was in her job, how she was always just performing and people-pleasing. And through a series of events, she decided to quit her job and hike the Appalachian Trail. So we talk about her journey on the trail and eventually how this all culminated in her own self-healing journey. Cris now knows that by truly listening to her deepest inner voice, to her soul, she can live life on her own terms in a way that feels true for her. So if you're somebody who your whole life, despite your very impressive resume and all your accomplishments, you just don't ever feel good enough, you feel like you always have something to prove, that you're living up to these standards of perfection, then this is a conversation that might make you start to rethink all of that. Because as Cris shares, it's only through doing the deep healing work, when we can come into that place of self-acceptance and self-love, then you can live the true powerful life that you are meant to live. So I encourage you to settle in for this conversation. Let it inspire and uplift you as you listen to this journey of grit, self-love, and living into your truth. All right, welcome back. And today I am with my dear friend and very badass Gen Xer, Cris Howard. Cris, thanks so much for taking the time and getting to spend this time together to hear more about your story. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. It's so nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, of course. I thought of you when I was dreaming up doing this podcast. I was thinking of all the amazing GenX friends that I have. And you, of course, were at the top of the list in terms of just the stories that you have to share and your own personal journey and how inspiring I think that can be for other people. So, this is going to be one of those conversations that we're just going to let it flow. I
Yeah.
don't know that there's going to be any one particular topic that we're going to focus on. I think there's a lot of nuggets of wisdom that folks can get from your personal, professional, athletic journeys. And so I'm just really excited to let it unfold and see where it goes.
We always have such good conversations, don't we?
I know.
I
And
think every conversation that we have could be a podcast.
I have a few friends like that where every time we have a conversation and we get off the phone or we leave each other, we're like, God, I wish we would have recorded that because that would make an awesome podcast
Yeah.
episode. So
Yeah, we have
yeah,
lots of those. Yeah.
yep. And I was thinking too when I was looking back over my notes and what we might want to talk about today, I did not realize that we have known each other for 10 years. It's 10 years this year because we met in 2014, right? Because did you do Ironman Boulder? Yeah, you did Ironman Boulder in 2014, right?
15,
15.
2015.
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
2015. Because
Is
I
that
qualified for Kona that fall, and then I raced Kona in 20. So
okay?
I was there for 20. Yeah, and I bought my car in 2014. And by the way, I still have that same car.
It's well, it's been whatever it is, 14 or 15,
Yeah.
because we met because I had come out to volunteer at Ironman Boulder. That's why I was thinking it was 14 because I did Boulder in 15. So I was thinking we did it in
Oh, is that
different
right?
years.
Oh,
So
well, I
whatever
got
year it
confused.
was, yeah, it
Huh.
doesn't matter. It's been almost a decade. So either way, longer than
Huh.
I would have thought because time has just flown for both of us. But I wanted to let folks know that this is one of those synchronistic meetings. I feel like I have so many awesome friends in my life that I have met synchronistically, meaning that
Yeah,
I think the universe put us in each other's paths for a reason. And
for sure.
so I had driven out to Boulder from DC to volunteer at Ironman Boulder because I wanted to do it the following year. And if you volunteered, you got a discount on the sign up.
Right.
And so I was driving the course and with my dog Winnie. And so we're driving on Highway 36 coming out of Boulder on the way to Estes Park. And I see, this is my perspective, I see this gal on this badass bike looking like a total pro. I thought you might have been a pro. And so we roll up beside you and I remember looking thinking, wow, she's really killing it. And so on the Ironman Boulder course, you loop around, you go up Highway 66, you come back down, and there was a little market. The market's still there, but it's changed names several times. So I
Oh,
don't remember
okay.
what it was called back then. But there was a market that was very popular and still is with all the cyclists to stop at because you can get snacks and they have scratch, nutrition, fuel on
Yes.
tap, like which is
Yes.
awesome. So Winnie and I stopped there for lunch, and pretty soon here you come rolling up on your bike. And I thought, okay, I wanna talk to this gal. And so we were talking outside, and it turns out we both lived in Virginia. We
Uh-huh.
both knew some of the same people, and it was just meant to be instant friendship. So, and then I got
Yeah.
to see you when I was volunteering, like on the course and stuff, which was really fun. So, and we've been fast friends ever since. So, I'm really grateful that the universe put me on Highway 36 at that time when you were biking so that I could see you.
And I would add to your description, I would say not just fast friends, and that certainly is the case, but I would also add deep friends. You know, there's a lot of friends that I have that are very surface, but you and I we've always gone to the deeper level. And I think that's the reason why we have such a special connection.
I totally agree. I think
Yeah.
of I don't know if you ever saw Fight Club. I don't know if that's in your wheelhouse or not.
Gosh, yeah, I have, but it's been years.
Yeah, they talk about on the airplane, single serving friends. These people you just meet like on the airplane, for example, and you talk for a while and then that's kind of it. Yeah, we definitely are not single serving friends and we do
No.
go very deep. And that's one of the things I've appreciated about our friendship is that we can go really deep and have amazing conversations. And so I think this will be one of those today.
Yeah.
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 So I always like to start by getting a sense of people's backstory, because I think it's really important and can give us a lot of good insights to reflect back on the time periods that we grew up in, especially for us Gen Xers in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s, and really look back and understand how, when, and where we grew up might have influenced our journey going forward. And so I
Mm-hmm.
just wanted to rewind to start off and have you tell us a little bit about your childhood growing up, what it was like being Cris growing up in the South in the 70s and 80s.
Oh gosh, where do I start? So, yes, I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, the deep South. People confuse Memphis and Nashville all the time. Memphis is known for the blues, and we are right on the Mississippi River. And so I know that I don't have an accent anymore. A lot of people observe that about me. But the second I smell barbecue or the second I listen to BB King, it comes right back. It is very classic. And sometimes I'll catch myself off guard and that Southern drawl will come straight back. So I grew up in the classic 19 middle class. I had three brothers in a very male dominated household and family. So we have a very large family. And so I think I grew up with a lot of those messages that females had at the time of I had two choices of a career. I could be either a teacher or I could be a nurse, but there was no in between. And even though I tore through math books, I would have these workbooks because that was before computers. And I would go through a math book in less than a week. And then I would beg my mom, please, can I have another math book? But there was no more to purchase because I went through them all. And I just love math and all of the intricacies of it, the patterns of it. And even when I was in sixth grade, I remember my sixth grade teacher talking about how I was a math whiz. But through the evolution of my childhood, I was taught, girls are not good at math, they're good at reading. But I would have, and I still have to this day, nightmares about having to finish these thick reading assignments and not finishing it and then having to sit down and sit for a test for something I didn't read. And it's one of those recurring childhood nightmares. Like, no, not the novel. I didn't read it. So anyways, let's see what else was descriptive. I also grew up in the 70s where there was the integration of African Americans into the school systems. And I remember very well how they would bus a group of students into our schools. And all of the chatter and all of the biases that people were trying to teach me at that time, this was about 1975, 19 to 1980, around that time period. And I was just so curious because I didn't see that from a very naive child's perspective. And there's a couple of stories about how I remember people were talking about, they would put this oil in their hair to keep it moisturized. And people would talk about, oh, that's so gross. That's so gross. And I remember Emma Jean Johnson sat in my pod and I was in science class and she sat right in front of me and I reached out and I just touched her hair just so naively. And God bless her, she's probably traumatized to this day because I probably, I didn't have the knowledge on saying, oh, I think you're so pretty. But I really did. I was like, her hair is not bristly. Her hair's really soft. And I was kind of like really confused by a lot of those messages that I got as a child. And I think that really solidified a lot of the reason why I live in the DC area now is because of the diverse culture and different languages and different looks and different philosophies. And I find it to be so enriching, which is very different than how I grew up, which was very limited and very quite biased in that philosophy.
Do you remember back then how you were able to navigate those racial tensions in the South? I mean, because you're so right. As children are innocent, and it
Yes.
is through growing up, starting at a very young age, that we get conditioned, socialized, indoctrinated into certain messages, belief systems, all of that. And over time, we don't even know it. But it sounds like at a very young age, you started to be aware of these racial biases don't sit well with me. And so, what do you think it was about you or your family or whatever you were exposed to that allowed you to at least have that awareness of, no, I want to be conscious of those biases and do better?
Honestly, Michelle, I don't know. I honestly don't know. I don't think there was anything conscious. I was never part of a movement or a platform. I was just curious about these messages that I was getting, very strong messages that I was getting. And then, but I think I've always loved people from early on. I think that might be part of my DNA structure is my love for people. And I just did not see it the same way. What I regret though is I didn't have the voice to be an advocate. So I think I sat quietly and observed, but I had so many wonderful influences of Black leaders. I remember Mrs. Ward in my second grade. She was my second grade teacher, and she was strict, and she had us ship shape in the class. And then I thought she was so pretty. I thought her skin was just glowing. I just loved looking at how the light would reflect on her cheek. And those were some of the early influences that I think that I had that has shaped me. But I don't think that there was anything that pushed me in that way. Like there's nobody else around me really was an advocate. I felt like very alone in that conversation with myself.
Mhm. Yeah, that.
In fact, I would say that I was probably the only one. There's another story about, it felt like everybody was part of a country club back then. Like, were you in a country club? Yeah, it's like that was the thing.
Dirty Dancing. No, we were not in it. We did not have a country club at the trailer park. We had a horseshoe pit. So no, but
okay.
like Dirty Dancing, although that took place a little bit earlier in time, but there was a lot of that mentality back in the early
Yes.
70s, mid 70s.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And this was certainly the case. And I grew up at the swimming pool. So every morning I would be on the swim team and I would have practice. And then in the afternoons I would stay. And basically the pool was my babysitter. And the entire day I would be out there. And I remember so well, there was one day where everybody started standing up and they looked around and there was a Black family who was walking down the sidewalk and then walking across. And then they did what they do. They found their deck chair and got into the pool, and everybody got out of the pool. And I was just watching and I didn't know what was going on. And then Mr. Carter, who was the club president, comes on the other side straight from the clubhouse, and he walks in with his commanding authority and he escorted that family out. And it gets worse. They cleaned the pool afterwards. And then everybody got in.
What kind
And
of
I was
impact?
like, but that was the same thing. I was like, but, and the conversation was, oh, their hair in the ointment that they put in their hair is making the pool unsanitary. That was the message that was being sent that day. But what I was seeing was how awful, what an awful experience. And it's a free country, right? Like there's no rules. There's no, like, they're just enjoying the day. And it just never really made sense to me. But that's one of those very frozen moments in time that also has shaped me and how they didn't just treat them differently, they humiliated them. And all, I mean, the the pool was crowded. It was a summer day, and he walked them out and escorted them out in front of all those people. Can you imagine the shame they must have felt?
No,
And it's
not
just
at
a
all.
little, you know, it's
Yeah.
just a mom and dad and their kid, you know? It was
Yeah.
just, they just was trying to show them a good time. But as back then, everybody around me is, oh my gosh, thank goodness Mr. Carter comes and saves the day. And I'm just thinking, wow, this just doesn't, it never really sat well with me. And that's why that memory is so powerful to me to this day.
Yeah. Yeah, it clearly is powerful. It's really stuck with you in terms of just the detail of the memory and how you
The detail.
felt
Yeah.
as that was happening. And
Yeah.
I think those kinds of experiences, and speaking as a white person who also grew up not in the South, but in a very rural area in a small town in Nebraska, where
Mm,
we didn't have the diversity even that Memphis has. And I know there are different issues that come, and certainly Memphis was at the center of the civil rights
yeah,
movement.
that's right.
So there are its own issues in being a city that's very diverse. Whereas I grew up in a town of 7,000 people that had no diversity. We had
Mm,
immigrants who would come from Mexico to work at the beef packing plants. And that's sort of the extent of the diversity
mm,
that we had. And I remember in elementary school, we had a young girl and her dad move into town. And the girl was black, the dad was white. I can't remember where the mom was in the picture. And it caused such a stir because that was the first black person we had in our community. And when I look back on that, and as I have done over the years, the last several years, my own work around my implicit and unconscious biases,
mm-hmm,
and my, as one of my mentors, Mike T. Hill, talks about, my own addiction to whiteness, addiction to the systems of oppression that we've grown up in,
mm-hmm.
addiction meaning that we're just so used to them and comfortable with them, right? That there are, I
We
look,
benefit from them.
exactly, absolutely, of
Why would we
course.
question it? Exactly.
We
Yeah.
never have to worry about going out of our house and having something happen to us because of the color of our skin. And that's such an important takeaway for people who I believe feel triggered when we talk about racism or whiteness or patriarchy and all of these systems of oppression, is that let's start from the fundamental notion that as white people, we don't have to worry about being harmed or disadvantaged because of the color of our skin.
Yeah.
So, all of that's to say, I think it's so important, as you are so well recognizing, to look back at those critical moments that really
Yeah.
shaped us in our childhood, for better or for worse, right? Because
Right.
some people could have witnessed that same situation and had the belief reinforced for them that Black people are inferior because of what they saw. And it
Yeah.
sounds like for you, it was the opposite of triggering this isn't right. And I felt the
Mm-hmm.
same way growing up, that it just wasn't right.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really love that you brought that up, because I think as we get older and as we're trying to make our own shifts and transitions in life, we have to look at all of the ways in which we are holding on to belief systems that don't serve us and don't serve other
Mm-hmm.
people.
Mm-hmm.
And once we start to get curious about that, not be shamed by it, but get curious about it and recognize that, hey, I was a kid growing up in the South. I was a kid growing up in a trailer park in Nebraska. I can't change that fact. What I
Mm-hmm.
can change now as an adult is my awareness of that and what I do with all of those ingrained patterns.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
growing up in the South, you had a much different experience that I did in terms of being exposed to different cultures and diversity. And you
Mm-hmm.
also grew up in a very male dominated family.
Mm-hmm.
And in the South, culture in particular. And what I'm hearing from your story is there wasn't a lot of encouragement for you as a woman to think outside the box, to
Mm-hmm.
do anything but be a nurse or a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
tell me about how, as you grew up and moved eventually out of the South, what was your trajectory like?
It's I think I was on that path, to be honest with you. I chose in college, I went to Rhodes College, which is a small private liberal arts school that is in Memphis. So from kindergarten through college, I stayed in Memphis and was surrounded by all of these messages. But in college, I think that this was the first time, particularly around religion, where we had 2 years to, that it was part of the funding of the college, that it was funded by I think it was a Presbyterian church, but it was never a religion that they pushed. Instead, it was just the opposite. It looked at the Bible from a historical point of view. And so this was the first time that I questioned my beliefs that I grew up with, you know, ingrained in me. I was very much indoctrinated into the Southern Evangelical Baptist, which is the right wing of the right wing. And for the first time, I saw and was taught the Bible from an academic point of view and how there are several different conflicts just from a historical document point of view. And that really kind of shifted. Oh, wait a minute. So all of these things that I've been taught and I blindly believed, maybe it's time to start questioning them. And I think that those 2 years and that course particular, I think became a foundational shift for me, that continued after college. I went on to work in Yellowstone National Park. And granted, this is devoid of any cell phones. It's devoid of any of those modern communication devices. It was me in the wilderness, and we all lived in this dorm. And the guy with the guitar and the guy who knew how to light the fire, those were the popular ones. And that's where we all congregated. And that was our socialization. But I think that experience and being so independent in that world really was the first time that I moved away from that Memphis cocoon and started to really start to question these boundaries that had been imposed on me and to see the world from a different lens, a very different lens. And even to see myself from a different lens where I could start doing things like rock climbing or kayaking. P.S. I am terrible at both and I never went back. But, I learned how much I love, hiking. We just did day hikes and just being outdoors and being with people and, how good it felt to just tell a good story around a campfire. There's just so many wonderful things that came out of that. So I think that was the beginning of the evolution towards questioning those beliefs. But I think that as I evolved as a person, and I think we'll talk about this through our conversation, I think it's fair to say that I have spent a good majority of my life unlearning all of these lessons that shaped me when I was a child. And
Mm.
I look at the women today and the girls today and the messages that they have and the choices that they have and the role models that they have and the diversity that they're exposed to. And I think, wow, they don't even know what an advantage that is and how much further that has lifted them. And it's really exciting to see. We're not there yet. We have a lot more to come. Look at our reproductive rights and, how we've taken so many steps back. But at the same time, we can look at that grander scheme and see there's been a lot of progress in many areas, and we do have some things to celebrate.
The one thing that I'm picking up on as I'm listening to you is that there is an innate curiosity in you, because in the face of so many of these opportunities for growth, let's call them, that you have experienced. And we're going to talk about more of those. But from racial tensions growing up in the South in the 70s
Mm-hmm.
to more spiritual awakening, for lack of a better term, when you got to college, any one of those could be situations where for a lot of people that can cause some disorientation and some shame because they think that they have been doing things wrong, or that it's going to be so uncomfortable to try to make this change or to see things this new way. And that's where a lot of people get stuck, is we get stuck in shame, right? We get stuck in
Oh,
shame
interesting.
and judgment of where we used to be or how we were raised or what we've believed, that when we see something new, it's so disorienting because it is outside of our comfort zone that it can shut us down. And I believe that the key really is curiosity. And that's what I hear in everything that you're sharing, is that you have this innate sense of curiosity. And certainly we can develop the skill of curiosity. And I think it's also a trait that a lot of folks have, is to be a little more inherently curious. And so I'm just wondering, let me check in with you. Do you feel like an inherently curious person?
You know, I've never really thought of it that way and put that fine point on it, but what you're saying does resonate, because you're right. I kind of think about all of the different themes, and I've always been a person who journals, who self-reflects, who checks in, who takes a minute to kind of digest everything that I'm taking in and assimilate it. And I think we can call that curiosity. Those practices are curiosity practices. But I can also think about some other times where I did wear the shame, particularly when it came to body image issues. So I had bulimia growing up because I was never good enough. And I had to fit this certain mold. I had to be perfect and beautiful and, the best at everything. And I think I didn't outwardly present shame, but inwardly I was throwing myself up. And that is shame there that I kind of wore for many years. I did that, but it was all very behind closed doors. And I would never, ever publicly admit that, because that in of itself is shameful. So it was kind of shame upon shame upon shame that I wore in that very closeted manner.
I don't think I knew that about you, or if you told
Yeah.
me, I had forgotten. And so I
Yeah.
appreciate you
I
sharing
never
that,
talk about
because
it.
yeah, well, I really appreciate you sharing it and talking about it now, because I know that that's going to resonate for a lot of people who also
Mhm.
maybe, and especially women. I know that men
Mhm.
experience bulimia too, and it's predominantly women. And there are a lot
Mhm.
of women who feel shame around that. There's
Mhm.
shame that triggers the bulimia in the first place, and then shame around being bulimic too. So, how old were
Mhm.
you, if you don't mind me asking, when the bulimia developed, and then when did you kind of start to heal from that?
I was in college, and I remember I felt like the binging episodes were almost out of control. I remember just purchasing a bunch of crap. And then I use the words throw myself up. Isn't that awful? I use the words throw myself up. I'm going to throw myself up. And that continued through when I went to work at Yellowstone, and in parallel with all of this kind of exploration in the world opening up, this kind of Memphis teachings, that's lots of teachings, lots of like all of these very limiting beliefs. Suddenly my world is opening up. And that's the time where I realized that this
And you stopped on your
interesting.
own, or did you seek support to help stop
No, I did it
yourself?
all on my own. Grit. It was all grit.
I'm I'm fascinated in this topic of body image that you mentioned, because we have a horrible sense of body image, particularly in this country. And that is
Yes.
one thing that is maybe getting incrementally better. And yet, with social media in particular, I feel like there's been some steps we see
I
on
know.
social media, or these influencers that look super thin and fit and are active and tan and whatever it might be. And there's just still a lot of unsupportive, toxic messaging, especially for women around body image. And so I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious for you, given how you grew up thinking that you weren't enough, you weren't pretty enough
Mm-hmm.
or thin enough, whatever it might be, especially in the
Mm-hmm.
South, where there are expectations of how a woman should look, right? Prim, I'm
Mm-hmm.
imagining prim and proper and all the things.
And
Um,
nice and
and nice and
smart
yep,
and
put together.
popular.
Yep,
Everything's perfect. Yeah.
yep,
Yeah.
yep.
Yeah.
How, so once you started healing from the bulimia, and I say healing because I think it is a journey. I don't know that it's something that, even though you may not still have that behavior, it's always a healing journey, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so tell me how your struggles, or your relationship, maybe is a better word, with your body image, how that has changed over the course of your life.
Oh, such a big topic. I think it's more than just the body image, honestly. For me, I think that it's self acceptance. And I think that's really where it is. And it's a journey of self acceptance of, you know, the movement from I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, to this journey of I am good enough, I am enough as I am, and I am worthy as I am. And that is a long, long journey. So it presents itself as bulimia, but then later it presented itself as this over exercising super achiever world champion Ironman, right? And then, and I'm sure we'll talk about that one. And then it presents itself as being, this perfection of, a career. And then so now I have, in the last, I would say, 5 years or so, coincidentally, in parallel with going through menopause. So I think that's no accident here, where I have gone through this journey of self acceptance, and I am just now entering a new era of living life on my terms, regardless of the consequence, and recognizing that a life lived by my own values, in alignment with my values, give me a much greater sense of joy than trying to please other people around me.
Hey, real quick, if you're a tried and true Gen Xer, chances are you loved a good mixtape just as much as I did. And maybe back in the day, you made a mixtape that was really your jam, and you might still be listening to it. You've listened to it nonstop. It's on repeat. So much so that you don't even remember how to change the tape anymore. Or maybe you don't even know what kind of music you like outside of what's on that mixtape. Well, let me stop speaking in metaphors and talk about real life here for a second. That mixtape metaphor is a great one for a lot of us who maybe 20 or 30 years ago started down a path that we thought was our jam. And now, as we've gotten into our 40s and 50s, we're realizing, no, that doesn't light me up anymore. Look, we're at a critical point in our lives where we're having to make a lot of decisions about what our futures look like, about how to care for our parents and our kids, how to take better care of our physical health. And so, this is why I created the podcast. And it's also why I have a special offer just for Gen Xers to take you through a program to learn how you can start making those decisions, how you can make these important shifts. And it's called the Gen X Shift Program. It's a 6-month program designed just for Gen Xers so that you can learn how to change that tape that's been playing on repeat. So to learn more, visit lifefromthesummit.com/Gen X Shift Program to find out all the details. And of course, send me an email at podcast@lifefromthesummit.com if you want to learn more. Remember, podcast listeners get 10% off on any of my programs. I'd love to see you there and get to work with you one-on-one to help you make these important shifts in life. All right, back to the show.
As women, I think that disease puts a fine point to it, but it shows up in many other ways that becomes that female experience.
I'm just pausing on that for a second? Because so many threads there that I want to pull on, because it's such a relatable experience.
Mm-hmm.
And let me start actually with the menopause piece of that, because I imagine there's a lot of listeners out there going through perimenopause or who are now postmenopausal. And I'll speak from my experience. It's the biggest shit show and growth for opportunity at the same time, right? Because
Yeah.
never have I experienced something physically that has been such an invitation for me to just allow it to be what it is and to bring in that self acceptance, as you talked about. Because even if we're taking hormones or drug therapy to help with that, it doesn't matter. This is something that your body is wanting to do and is naturally doing. There's no fighting it. And so it really is this huge invitation to self acceptance. And
Mm-hmm.
as we are moving through this stage of life, that is when a lot of women start to realize, screw it, I'm just going to be who I am, allow my body to do what it wants to do, fully accept myself. And I don't know that it's sad, but there's a little part of me that wishes I wish I would have felt that way about myself when I was younger. And
Mm.
maybe that's possible. Maybe for some of us it takes those 20 or 30 years to get there. But I'm curious, looking back now, because this has been pretty recent for you in the last 5 years, and I do want to talk about the Ironman journey and how
Mm-hmm.
that plays into this.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
looking back now at the younger versions of Cris, what do you wish she would have known back in her 20s and 30s that you would like her to tell her now?
The key is that I'm worthy. It's that simple, that I'm worthy. I never felt like I was good enough. I was a female. Just that alone is not good enough. I will never measure up, ever. And so I drove myself to great lengths to be the best at everything. And when I was in elementary school, I was in the beta club. Do you remember the beta club?
We
Did
didn't
you
have
have
that.
one?
What is that?
Yeah. And then that was like the Phi Beta Kappa in elementary school. And then of course in college I was Phi Beta Kappa, which for those of you who don't know, it's very elite honor society that only very few schools are able to have a Phi Beta Kappa chapter. And then of that, you're like the top 1% of the school. I graduated as a valedictorian for my psychology department. I was just looking at that certificate yesterday as I was cleaning out my attic. Um, and, so it's like I had to be everything. Everything had to be perfect. And it was killing me. It was literally killing me. But I didn't have time to feel that pain because I had to sprint on a constant basis just for basic love. And if that's true or if it's not, that's the message that I received and that's the message that I interpreted and the cloak that I wore. And so a lot of my achievements, which is quite impressive, but it's under the cloak of not being good enough, trying to be enough, trying to get basic love. And so if I could go back to myself, right? If I could go back to little Christy, back in my 3-year-old self, as I'm developing this kind of self, kind of perception and how I fit into the world, I'm worthy. It boils down to that. You are worthy of love, little Christy. It's that simple.
When you say that, do you feel that little Christy in you? Do you feel her able to receive that?
Yes, now I do, but it took me a lot of work. I'm not going to
Yeah,
lie. It took me a
absolutely.
lot of work. In fact, I remember the breakthrough. I did a lot of hypnosis in the last 5 years, it transformed my life. And we were able to go back to those formative moments when I was 3 years old and playing on the playground and, even playing in my crib. And we were able to go back to those moments and interpret through adult eyes what my child eyes saw and just basically reframe those moments. Very deep stuff and not exactly your everyday dinner conversation, but I will have to say that was the beginning of my transformation to that true self-acceptance, because those messages were so ingrained and so deep, just being a female.
I appreciate you sharing that, because there's a couple
Yeah.
of seeds I think to plant here for other women and men and transgendered people experience this too. So I'm not just isolating women, but because
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about the female experience here, it is universal in my experience that everyone has what I call this not enoughness in some
Mm-hmm.
respect.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't learn how to embrace and integrate and show love to those parts of us that feel that we are not enough, it is constantly going to be taking a toll on us, because we're constantly going to be trying to ignore it, dismiss it, prove it wrong, right? Like all of
Mm-hmm.
those things
Yep.
that it is a part of us. And so we don't want to excise it. I truly believe in integrating all parts of us to make us
Yeah.
whole. And that's what I hear, is that you have this I get this feeling from you of wholeness, that there's this
Mm.
integration now of all these parts of you that for most of your life, up until about the last 5 years, has constantly had to feel like she had to prove herself time and time and time
Yes.
again. And
Yeah.
now you have
Yeah.
opened up, and instead of trying to fight that or constantly prove yourself, you opened it up, you got support, which is very challenging. And I want to come back to that in a second. It's
Yeah.
challenging for people of our generation to ask for support and get
Yep.
actually go get support and help.
Mm-hmm.
But you did that. And now you've kind of allowed her, that younger Christy, that not enoughness, to
Mm-hmm.
be part of you and come into full acceptance. And I think that is such a beautiful journey. So I want to plant that seed for folks to recognize that it's okay to have that not enoughness, because we all do. So you're not alone. And there are ways to heal from it and to start to integrate it. And that's possible. And I think you're a great example of that. But I want to go back and kind of ask about all the things that you did to make up for that not enoughness over the
Yeah.
years. But I
Mm-hmm.
want to also pull on the thread a little bit when you talk about hypnosis and getting support. What was finally the straw that broke the camel's back, or what made you finally decide to go get help to start to heal yourself?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to answer your question, but I do want to add to something that you just said, and to add to the complication of people holding on to that not enoughness for a long time. Michelle, it served me.
Yep.
It was my superpower.
Yep.
That was the reason why I was excelling at everything.
Yes.
So I befriended not enough. It was my friend. And so there's an interesting paradox in a little, and not, I'm not going to call it a little bit of fear, a big fear of letting that not enough go. And then who am I then? Because it had become such an ingrained part of my personality. And so, yeah, it's not that simple, right?
Oh,
When you've
100%.
integrated such a feeling of shame and it drives you and it makes you really an amazing person, and you get all of this attention like, oh my gosh, you're amazing, blah, 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 and like, look at my resume. Aren't I great? and but it's fueled by this poison that's inside of our souls, and to let that go, what then? And
Yep.
that's
Exactly.
scary.
I love
And
that you
will
said
I be
that.
loved?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So what was the catalyst, was your question? What was that
Mm-hmm.
catalyst to do that shift?
Mm-hmm.
And I would say it started with my back injury. So I was an Ironman athlete, world class, for I think about 10 years. And that's when you and I met each other. And so my entire entity, my entire identity was surrounding this being a world class athlete. So not only did I race, but I also became on the Ironman board of advisors. And we together established a foundation called Women for Tri, where we brought in and more women into the support and helped to reduce those barriers. And it was everything. But then I tore my multifidus. What is a multifidus? One says, because no one knows, nor did I. So the multifidus is under your erector spinae. So basically, it goes down your spinal column and it connects your core muscles to your limbs. And the place where the tear is interrupted the nerve signals to my left leg. So it presents as step, drag, step, drag, step, drag, right? And when I do single leg squats, for example, then my right leg, nice and strong, solid, it knows exactly what to do because the nerve impulse says, okay, you got to, flex the glute med and then your quad and then your calves, and then you work together in unison as a choir. The left side, however, is like, what? What are we doing? And so the best way to describe it is a bad internet signal. So eventually our muscles get there, but it takes a while. And sometimes it takes me 2 to 3 reps before that signal to finally be in play and play out over time. That means that that right leg does all the work. The left leg kind of drags along. And so what finally got me out of Ironman is I tore my Achilles. But the root cause was the tear in my multifidus. So now I had 2 major injuries that I had to overcome. Happy to say the Achilles is now fine, no issues, but my multifidus tear will stay with me for the rest of my life. And so I can't do any running anymore. I can ride a bike-ish, but when you're used to averaging 22 miles an hour for a 112-mile bike course, and now I can barely do 14 miles an hour, it's just that risk benefit is just not equating. So now the threat of being run over by a car just doesn't outweigh the joy that I get from it. So
I want to,
all that
can I
to
pause
say,
on that?
yeah.
I want to just pause on that for just a second because you glossed over a little bit. You said world-class Ironman athlete. And I want to, for folks who don't know what Ironman is, I want to give them that context. And I also want to tell them my experience of you when I first met you as a world-class Ironman athlete. So for folks who don't know, an Ironman triathlon is a 2.4 mile swim, 112-mile bike ride, and a marathon, 26.2 miles, all done in the same day. And you have to complete it under 17 hours. Okay.
Right.
So when you say world-class Ironman athlete, it wasn't just that you were doing Ironmans. Like I got through some Ironmans. I was not a world-class athlete. I suffered and was very slow. When I met you, you had a necklace that had, I don't know, at the time, I think you might have had like 12 or 13. We call them M dots because the Ironman logo is this M with like a little dot in it. And you had little M dot necklaces with little diamonds in them, I think, right? In the M's, because you were trying to qualify to go to the Kona Ironman World Championship. And there are a few ways that you can qualify for the Ironman Championship in Kona. One of them is by time. The other one is by doing a certain number of Ironman races. And so you were trying to get in by doing, is it 15 or how many races would you have needed?
It's 12. Yeah,
12.
You have to do 12, and then the 13th is your Ironman qualifier.
So you may not have had 12 or 13 M dots, but you were working your way up. It was a heavy, it was hardware on your neck. You had a lot of them going on. And so that was impressive in and of itself that you had done multiple and done them well. Like you weren't just barely finishing. You had really good times in your finish times. And then you ended up actually qualifying by time in what Ironman did you qualify in?
It was Ironman Maryland. I got second place. Yeah.
So when you say world-class athlete, we really do mean you weren't professional, but you were a very professional amateur. Let's just say that.
I was training with the pros.
Yeah.
They were my
so
peers.
the reason I want to bring that up is because that is how steeped your identity was in
Right.
Ironman. And I think that's important to remember, that when you talk about getting the kind of injury that you got, it's like somebody has pulled up the e-brake and you're going 100 miles an hour and all of a sudden you're like, "Ah," and now
Hmm.
what? So
Hmm.
what was that like
Hmm.
for you? That like, well,
Yeah.
now what?
Well, like it caused the house of cards to crumble down around me. And I didn't even know that it did. Ironman was my way to cope with a really terrible divorce that I had. And I married that guy because my dad liked him. Again, more doing things to please other people outside of what is aligned with my own worth. And so all of these things, and then suddenly, like I'm just stripped of everything that gave me this comfort, this cloak to hide behind, and I couldn't hide anymore. I didn't have anything to hide behind. And so I was desperate. I tried to throw myself into work, and I did. Um, and, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to fill that void. And then I also noticed that I had disproportionate responses to certain triggers surrounding my family. Um, they would, you know, dismiss me. They would have, I don't want to get into too much of that right now, but, I felt like, again, I was on the outside looking in from my own family again, because I'm a girl. And so it's a nut, here we go again. And that would just send me to go crazy town. So I would either drink, and then at some point I did start to have suicide ideations. And I thought, you know what, this is not who I am. This is not me. And so that was the turning point that I started to say, this is going to stop, and it's going to stop now, and I'm done with this conversation. And so that was the beginning of this kind of stepping out of that hole and into this journey of self acceptance for the first time.
I think that is a very, uh, at least common theme that I've heard in terms
Mm,
of stories of people who have spent most of their lives, and I'll include myself in this, doing all of these things, as you said, whether it's with our careers or athletics or
hmm.
being in certain kinds of relationships to fill that void, fill that hole. And then when those things get stripped away for one reason or another, or you have that disorientation and you're left with just yourself and you're like,
Hmm.
oh shit, now what?
It's a crisis.
Yeah, basically to
Hmm.
short circuit this, it's like, well, I guess I need to get real with myself and do that work. And that's really that, as you said, catalyst. I love that word, because when you take all those things away that you've been layering on top of your true self, when those things are gone, you're left with yourself. And that is very,
Hmm.
very scary for a lot of
Hmm.
people. And the
Hmm.
suicide ideation makes sense. And a lot of people, and I include myself in this too, have gone there,
Hmm.
because when we get to the point where life feels so painful, and
Hmm.
this isn't the life that we wanted, the life we thought we'd had, the life we've spent the last 20 years building, I don't want this life. I just want the
Right.
pain to stop. And the
Right.
only solution to that, when you don't see hope, is to think about not being here. And
Yeah.
and I really want to know, I want to normalize that, in the sense that I think a lot of people experience that and don't talk about it. And we need to talk about
Oh,
it more.
yeah. I
Absolutely.
know I didn't talk about it.
Mm-mm.
I never talked about it, because if I talk about it, then it's going to shatter this veneer that I've so skillfully crafted, right? And this veneer of I have it together, this veneer of perfection. Look at all these accomplishments that she's done, and then to say she's the one who had suicide ideations. What? That doesn't compute. But what was going on is I had this shell of this wall that I had built up, but underneath that wall was this tremendous sense of desperation for love. I just needed to be loved by people who should be loving me. And I just didn't feel it. And I didn't know what to do with it. And the whole time. And now that I'm, here, looking backwards, just loving myself is all that's needed.
Yep.
That's all that's
That,
needed. It
yep.
doesn't matter because everybody else is flawed and are going through their own generation, through their own struggles. And if we can, now I look at it with compassion and with a forgiveness and a love, a true love, that when people can't show up the way that I need them to show up, it's just because they're going through their own journey too. And it's okay, and I love them from where they are right now. But it's taken me a long time. But at that moment, I needed them to show up for me and they weren't. And that started the crisis. Yeah.
Yeah, because when we are trying to get love to fill a void and we're trying to get that from external sources, when that isn't met, then we're disappointed and we take it to mean that there's something wrong with us. And then it just perpetuates the cycle of, well, I got to do more. I got to be more. Clearly, I'm not worth anything, or so-and-so would love me. And the beauty in what you're saying is that when we realize, as cheesy as it sounds, but it's cheesy and true for a reason, is that when we start with ourselves and love ourselves and fully accept ourselves, all the parts of us, then it opens that door to compassion, that we can see that other people are struggling too, and they might be having a hard time loving themselves. And so, of course, they're not going to love us the way we want them to love us, right? And so if we can, no, they can't. So if we can, we want to start to love ourselves. Doesn't mean that we don't have boundaries or that we tolerate behaviors from other people. I mean, that's a different conversation. But the point is that we got to fill our own cup first with love for ourselves first, so that we can change our relationship to other people and how they're treating us, and learn that no matter what anybody thinks of us, does to us, that we are worthy and we can love ourselves first. I really want to get your sense, because I know I'm thinking of some friends of mine who have recently experienced changes in their health and their physical fitness because they have either gotten diagnosed with an autoimmune disease or have long COVID, different situations from yours where there was an injury. There's also a lot of people who have life-altering injuries. And so for anyone who's experienced that kind of 180 shift in their physical health and well-being, what comfort or words of advice or wisdom would you want to share with them?
Don't focus on what you can't do. Focus on what you can do. And that can really define your happiness and how you find it.
Yeah. I think that's a beautiful place to start, because it comes back to the expectations, right? Like it requires us shifting our expectations and not clinging to what we used to be able to do. And that comes down to the identity shift that you talked about, not being able to do Ironmans anymore. That was a real identity shift for you. And we're going to continue to experience those as we go throughout life, all different kinds of identity shifts. And we have to be willing to let go of what was, or integrate it, like we can transcend and include it essentially, and allow us a lot of grace and compassion for where we are now and what we can do. I think that's beautiful. So I want to bring us back to, because I said I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things that you've done over your life to sort of patch over that not enoughness. So kind of take me through in sort of bullet fashion, because I know I want to come back to some of these, but just some of the things that you had done over the course of your life to kind of patch over that not enoughness.
This long resume?
Yeah.
It's impressive.
Yeah, it is.
So it is. Like, I made straight A's in school, and then I got into this honor club, and then I was Phi Beta Kappa, and I was in Kappa Delta sorority. Go Katie. And, dated all the cute guys, and I was a cheerleader, and that was college. And then then I went to graduate school, and that wasn't enough. So I got 2 graduate degrees. And then I worked for the big fancy jobs. I worked for, the Fortune 100 companies that everybody knows, and I could name drop. Look at who I work with, who. And then I went up the corporate ladder and got to an executive level position. And then I was able to buy a red Mercedes and, put my, $15,000 bike on top of my red Mercedes. Ooh, now look at me. Like, I'm so cool. And, oh gosh, it just kept going on and on and on. Yeah. So it was about, my outward appearance. I was fit. I was pretty. I had this very handsome husband who, P.S., turned out to be abusive. That's in a whole nother story. And I had, I was athletic. I had a successful career. I was smart. I had all the things. I had it all together. And so from the outside, people would be, oh, you're so amazing. And I'd think, oh, well, but I still have this to do and I still have that to do. And so I wasn't able to receive any compliments because all I saw was, I need more. I need more. I need more.
That lands like,
Yeah.
I want a t-shirt that says I am unable to receive compliments, because that
Yeah.
is constantly my growth edge, is to just receive a compliment. And for so many women I know, and there's men I know included in this too, it's so hard to receive a compliment. I remember when I first moved out here, I actually went to an intuitive in Boulder, and she very clearly said, look, I'm not predicting your future. I'm just kind of reading you, like reading your energy. And she said, the big thing with you is that every cell in your body doesn't know how to receive. So for example, you take a drink of water and it hits one cell and that cell says, no, I'm good. Pass it on to the next cell. So she said, you need to learn at a cellular level how to receive. And so that's been like my work the last however long I've lived out here, almost 8 years, I guess, is to learn to receive, so that when somebody says a compliment, instead of being like, oh, no, that's not true, or thinking that they have an agenda by complimenting me, I just try to say, thank you. I appreciate that, but it's so hard. So I want to come back to a couple of things, because there's your divorce, and then there was you didn't mention this, but I'm going to mention it, your cancer diagnosis that you had fairly recently. And then you quit your job, and then you hiked the Appalachian Trail. So I'm going to like bullet point each of those, because what I want to come back to, particularly, let's go back to your divorce. And I know you got divorced a little bit younger. You got divorced finally when you were 39. Is that right?
Yeah, that's when it finalized. I knew I needed to leave him at 35. I left him at 37, literally with the clothes on my back, and then finally divorced. The divorce went through at 39. 4 years of my life dedicated to divorcing one man. That's a PhD in divorce in my book.
You could have started your own law firm, probably.
I know. I could have started my own law firm if I had only known.
So I know, especially as we get to this stage of life, there are a lot of folks unhappy in their relationships.
Yeah.
And so because I think you are such a wealth of wisdom from your experience, what could you say to somebody who is really miserable, maybe in a relationship that they got into to prove something to their parents or to make up for how they didn't feel like enough? What would you say to that person that could help motivate them to maybe extricate themselves from that relationship?
Well, whatever I'm going to say is prefaced by my heart goes to those people who are going through that hell, because it is a special kind of hell to be living with somebody and completely integrated every aspect of your life with one other person who is no longer serving you or your needs, or in my case is actually taking away from my health and jeopardizing my safety on many levels. So whenever I hear people going through that, my heart just cringes for them. So I'm with you, and just know that it doesn't last forever. It feels like it will, but it doesn't. It doesn't. So all of that said, oh gosh, now I forgot your question.
That's okay. Just like, how does somebody even begin to take the first step to get out of that kind of situation?
I think for me, in my story, is that started to listen to the voice that was deep inside of me. And I knew what my truth was, and my kind of my litmus test is the first thought when I wake up in the morning is my truth. Because that thought is an unprocessed, unbiased, raw thought. And when you think it in the first thing in the morning, that is all of your body senses. We call it intuition, but we receive all this information and we come to a conclusion. And you can justify it, you can put your cognitive structure, you can put your logic behind it, you can talk yourself out of it, but your truth always is deep inside of you, and it always is your guiding light. And so my guiding light was that I need to leave, that I am on a trajectory that is going down, 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 and it was risking my life. And my whole family was behind this guy. And, it was all part of the story, right? We had an 8,000 square foot house out in the country, and he was good looking, and we had it all together. Michelle, it was my facade. It was part of the facade. But I finally got that courage to know that I need to live my truth come what may. And it was come what may. I started my entire life from scratch, except for my job. My job was my one sense of stability, but I lost my friends. I lost my family, regained them later, but at that moment, lost my family, lost my identity, my money. My 8,000 square foot house now was, his way to attract all the other women. And I moved into this teeny tiny, 900 square foot condo. And I literally started from scratch. That's how I got into Ironman. It became my social connection. It was my way to rebuild my identity and to start to slowly move my way out of that pain. So, but interestingly, rather than address it, right, I masked it with Ironman, but it served me and it was great. It was a fun story, and I'm so glad that I had it. But, that was the thing that I would say, the advice that I give to other women or other people in that situation is listen to your soul. Your soul knows. That's where it starts. And when you align your actions with what your soul is asking, there's only good that's only going to come out. Just be courageous and patient, and it will come. It does.
Yeah.
It does.
Listen to your soul and be courageous and patient, because it's not easy. It was an entire journey for you, and it wasn't like you got out of that marriage and everything was fixed overnight. There was still more healing for you to do. And you mentioned that you had very successful career. You worked for some very successful Fortune 100 companies. When I met you, you were doing very well at a particular company. And then a few years ago, you were diagnosed with a particular type of cancer. Can you talk about that a little bit, and what additional invitation into growth and healing that was for you?
So, remember how I spent all my summers at the pool? Don't do that.
But wait, did you climb up your TV antenna to the top of your trailer house with aluminum foil and baby oil to sunbathe?
I didn't have aluminum foil, but I would have used it if you were hanging around me. But I definitely had baby oil and iodine in the baby pool.
God, what were we thinking? I do not... For folks who might be listening who are younger generations, no kidding, that's what we did. Like, that was...
The tanner the skin, the closer to God.
Yes, absolutely. And to get closer to God, I had to climb up on top of my trailer to get closer to the sun. But yes, we baked ourselves. Even in college, my best friend and I would go to the pits, the sand pits in Kearney that were just like dug out holes in the ground that they filled in with water by the highway. And we laid out there all day. I got so dark that my boobs looked like headlights. I mean, it was, I don't know what we were thinking. So, so that has effects. It
That was
definitely
our
causes
standard of
effects.
beauty.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
then the 80s gave us tanning beds. Eureka!
Yep. Yep.
Don't do that either. Don't
Because
do the tanning beds.
those were better for you than the sun. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And you got all the vitamin D and you could tan safely. Oh, God. The marketing messages. Oh, Lord. So, anyway, surprise. It was melanoma.
Yeah. Big surprise.
And it doesn't help that I have the genetic profile, being Northern European, that it just makes me have a propensity towards skin cancer in all forms. And I have had basal, squamous, but melanoma was the big one. And so, yeah, there it goes. But
I remember when you
yeah.
called me about that diagnosis, and it just I could hear in your voice the awakening that it was for you. And so the words "I have cancer" are three of the worst words that we can hear. I had cancer in law school, thyroid cancer. There are words that nobody is ever prepared to hear. And so, what did hearing that do to you?
Well, I did have cancer with basal cell and squamous cell, and I scoffed at it. But when I got melanoma, that's a little closer to home. This one's serious. And then my doctor had to take a big old chunk out of my arm, it's like you can see it. There's like a dent in my arm, and like now, oh my gosh, now this perfection is flawed, and I don't look good in a sundress anymore because I have this huge
Mm.
scar on my arm. And, so that was like oh crap. But more importantly for me is this was the kick in the pants that I needed to realize that where is my life now? And I was missing being outside all day. I love pushing my body to the edge and finding another gear and discovering that I really don't have any boundaries. It's so cool, but it's true. There's no boundaries in life, like we can do anything we want ourselves to do. And that's so cool. That's such a cool realization. But I miss that physical being outside, that whole thing. And then my job at the time, as successful as it was, there was an announcement that my division was being spun off into a new company. And so, with that, we also were entering into a recession of our sector, in biotechnology. And so, we were losing sales, and everybody could smell it. And so that created this environment where, it's musical chairs, and there's about to be a lot of chairs that are going to be gone. So I need to do what I need to do, including lying about my colleagues and throwing people under the bus and all of the toxic stories that you hear. That became the norm. And I just was like, I miss this. This isn't serving me. And I was going through all of this kind of evolution of who am I and loving this inner self. And I was like, this isn't working. And I try to find a solution. But as I mentioned, my sector was starting to go into a recession. This was last year in 2020. And so I quit my job. I was at one of my friend's house. I had taken some time off to heal from and undergo the cancer treatment. And I saw this map of the Appalachian Trail. And for those of you who don't know the Appalachian Trail, it's a 2,200-mile footpath that starts in Georgia and it ends in Maine. And all told is 550,000 feet of elevation gain, which is the equivalent of hiking Mount Everest 18 times.
Every time I hear that, I'm like, what? 5
I know,
feet of
that's a little
elevation
mind-blowing,
gain
isn't it?
over 2,200 miles. Yeah.
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 But I was like, this is it. This, I can walk. I can't run and I can't cycle, but I can walk. How hard can it be? And so I quit my job, and 2 months later, after seeing that sign, I just watched a bunch of YouTube videos and showed up on the trail.
Wait, okay, so I am going to pause on this because I distinctly remember it's almost been a year. I don't know when this podcast episode is going to air,
It's
but
April 10th.
Yeah.
Was my start date. Yeah.
Yeah. So I remember you calling me a couple of months before that, telling me
Yes.
that you were going to do this. And I'm going to tell you something that I didn't tell you before. When you told me that, of course, I love you and I'm going to support you 100%. But as somebody who lives in Colorado, is a type A, prepared for everything, like as soon as I moved to Colorado and realized that if I wanted to go hiking in these mountains, I better learn what the hell I was doing because these mountains would kill you in a heartbeat. So I took
Yep.
all kinds of classes. I joined the Colorado Mountain Club. I took wilderness trekking, wilderness first aid, all the climbing classes, all the gear classes, navigation, like all the things. And when I go for a 3-mile hike, my backpack is prepared for every contingency. I have a huge first aid kit. I have layers. I have all this stuff. So I've been like educating myself on hiking for the last 8 years. And I hiked a little bit when I lived in Virginia too, but I look back and realize I didn't know what the hell I was doing when I lived in Virginia. There were several times I probably should have died hiking, but did not. So when you told me this, and I know you were in Yellowstone, you've done some hiking, and I know you're a big girl and you are very organized and all the things, but I was like, what the hell what is she thinking? Because I was like, this is a lot. This is a lot of gear prep. This is a lot of
Yep.
knowing how to carry a lightweight pack that will still sustain you with food and water. It's walking a lot of miles every single day for months, like 6 months. I was scared for you. And I didn't tell you that. I was legit scared for you and concerned. And so we're going to ruin the end for everybody and tell them that you made it. You did the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I was so relieved that you did and that you were okay. So
only
let's just
20% who start actually finish. So
yeah, that statistic was not helping me
because it is that hard.
Yeah, that statistic did not come from me at all, like understandably. So now that I've like fully confessed to you that I was worried for you and was like, what the hell?
It's because you love me.
Yes. So you got this inspiration. What was it that really called to you at that moment in time as you are coming off your cancer diagnosis, you quit your job? What was that allure of the Appalachian Trail for you?
I needed that adventure. I needed to find my soul again. And it was really wild when I saw that map of the Appalachian Trail. And mind you, this was not a lifelong goal. I tell some people it was a lifelong goal just because it's easier to digest that way. But honestly, it was a 60-day goal.
Yeah. No, you're serious when you say you watched YouTube videos like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that for everybody, but
No.
you could do it because you were super organized. I get it. I wouldn't recommend that for everyone.
Yeah.
But.
Yeah. Remember all the skills that I gained from not being good enough really serves well in these moments.
Yep.
I know how to bring it. And, but I just, I just needed that ground shift change, that seismic change that shocks the system because the current state of affairs was not working. And my job itself was getting so toxic that my cancer diagnosis and getting the treatment for cancer was a relief. It was a relief. And that says something. Wow. And so as that date approached for me to get to that date where I would come back to work, those feelings of, oh my gosh, I can't go back, that they become very real. And so it goes back to that same feeling that I had when I know that I needed to have get a divorce. When I woke up in the morning, I listened to my truth. And my truth was that I need this. I need this. And when you listen to that truth, you do things out of this amazing inner power that comes out of you. And I can't describe how powerful that is. And you recognize how stupid it is and how unsafe and, you've never pitched a tent before. Are you kidding me? Like all the reasons why not to do it? And then, of course, I'm like, I don't have an income. I was on, Michelle, I just told you I was on Medicaid because I had no income for a year. More reasons not to do it than to do it. But when you have this, when you listen to your soul, it drives you. And come what may, come what may. I didn't know. I was jumping off into the deep end. I didn't know if my back was going to hold up. That was the biggest risk. I knew that physically, mentally, I've got it because I've gone through hell and back, and it's giving me a lot of skills. But it was my back that was my worry. But I did it. I did it. It's just
Yeah.
walking.
You planned for what, 6 months?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And how long did it actually take you?
5.5.
Yeah. So you were ahead of schedule, which is amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're not lying when you said you didn't know how to pitch a tent. I remember you texting me photos. You went out like it was like a field or forest or something by your house.
It's like a mile from my house.
Yeah. This is just so crazy to talk about. Like, please, I have to emphasize this enough. Not recommended for everybody, but you like did a bunch of YouTube research, bought all the gear. You did a very good job figuring out the gear. Yeah, my heart like palpitates a little bit just thinking of this. Watched some YouTube videos, went out, did a trial test run camping trip one night in the rain. And that was it. Like you hadn't camped before, no tent, no like cook your food with the little stove, no nothing. That was it. And then you're off to Georgia to set foot on the trail. People can't, like, I'm not Catholic and people can't see who aren't watching, but I'm doing like the Catholic crossing of that's how I felt when you were setting off on this journey. So, but I remember you saying, and this is where your planning really came into play. You like seriously type A planned the crap out of this, which was amazing because for folks that don't know, when you're on the Appalachian Trail, clearly you're not taking 6 months worth of food with you. So there are stops along the way at various towns along the trail where you can pick up. Same is true on the Pacific Crest Trail, like any through hike. There's going to be towns along the way where you can have stuff sent ahead of time so you can pick up additional supplies. And so you had that all planned out like a whiz. Like if anybody does want to hike the AT and they want to know how to plan out the trip, come talk to you because you had that logistical planning down to a T. So, and then you stopped. There were some nights when you did stop and stay a night or two, like at a hostel or a hotel or something just to kind of recoup. You stopped with your family in Virginia where were they that you stopped and stayed with them? Roanoke, yeah. So, but tell me just kind of, it's like so many questions. Okay. First of all, when you set foot on the trail in Georgia, what was going through your head?
It was just a big sigh. Here I am. And so if you've watched the movie A Walk in the Woods with Robert Redford and Nick Nolte, which is a fabulous movie, by the way.
I've read the book. The book is Bill Bryson.
So funny.
Is it very
Nick Nolte's character he just takes it away. But there's a famous arch, and that is at Amico Falls. And that marks the beginning of the approach trail, which is an 8-mile hike up to the actual start of the Appalachian Trail, which is at the top of the ridgeline. And that is where you have to have your training for where the bear sightings are and how to dig a cat hole and the leave no trace principles. And then you, sign up and you get your tag, a pass that you put onto the outside of your pack. And so there's a picture of me confidently, the arch, this stone arch, and I have my leg crossed out with my hand on my hip, and I look like I have it all together. And I look at that picture and I'm like, girl, you did not know a thing.
So hopeful.
And I think this is one of my new secret powers and my new kind of chapter 2 on life is recognizing that I don't have to have it all together. And I think this was the ultimate test. And I remember walking into the first campsite of the day, And there was a group of very seasoned hikers. They were wearing, the do-rags and the Crocs, and they were expertly poking the fires with, to make their dinner. And they all had long beards. And I call them the Hells Angels, but hiker version. And I remember walking up, and I walked up and I said, "Hi, guys. I've pitched a tent once. And can you teach me how to find a camp spot? Because I'm not sure what I should be looking for." And they were kind of like, and just kind of like barking. And I thought, man, I'm in trouble. This is really risky, but here it is. I have no other choice. And there's the one guy who's the leader, and he's wearing this tie-dye shirt, and the shirt says, "I've got weed for sale." And he's the epitome of the Hells Angels, and he's from Appalachia, and his accent follows. It's that deep, deep Southern accent that requires a translator to understand. And he says, "Shit." And I'm like, he goes, "I've been out here I clutch my pearls. Yeah. So, and he says, "I've been out here all my life, and I still don't know what I'm doing out here." And everybody around him started chattering like, like, "Oh, that's the truth." And that whole gang of these very seasoned hikers got up, and they walked me around that camp, and they showed me, okay, so you look for a 6-inch square, and you look up and make sure that there's no trees that could fall on you in the night, and you need to swish the leaves and make sure there's no snakes or rodents. And they took me under their wing, and they became my lifeline. And so that's the magic of the trail, is that there's this human kindness and compassion that permeates every person that goes on the trail. But, going back to the story that we're weaving here, I had courage to be vulnerable. I had courage to not have my act together. I had courage not to have this facade of perfection, and to recognize that I'm walking to a situation where I don't have my stuff together. In fact, I don't have anything together. And I just had the faith and the belief in myself, in that inner drive that I needed to do this. And that's what carried me.
Did you ever doubt that you were going to be able to finish?
Not once.
Not once.
Not once. There was one, I worried about my back. And so if my back started to do the same, kind of wonky leg situation, then I knew I took a ball with me. It was like this big 4-inch ball that's very light. It was only 0.5 ounces. And I used that to roll out and make sure that those muscles were fluid. And then I had another kind of warm up exercise that could start that cascade. So basically remind my nerves that it needs to signal in this way. And so I did that routine very, very consistently throughout the hike. And I think that was what allowed me to do it.
Yeah, which is very impressive.
But in terms of mentally, yeah, I could not tell the story. I quit my job and I put it out on the line, and I didn't finish. I can't tell that story. It's just, I'm not a quitter. I finish. I'm a finisher. I that's what I do. And so that was going to be my story. And towards the end, this, like I said, you can leave the trail at any crossroad, and so towards the end, you're into 1900 miles, I think, is when I started, right when I got into the border of Maine. And that's when the trail was just unforgiving, raw, not groomed, basically throw you outside and a big valley and with a bunch of boulders and, rock faces. Like literally you're doing rock face climbing. Like, this is not a flat trail. This is a technical trail where one slip of your foot and you could fall and have a very ugly outcome. And I remember those days, and my back started to go out because I was having to go down these descents, and for me to lower my leg and land on it, only my right leg would be solid enough to land. My left leg, remember, it was really wonky. And so I started to get worried about my Achilles tendon and seeing that whole story play out again. But I just knew I had to do it. I just had to do it. And so that will and that inner voice, that guide is what powered me through.
Do you feel that that voice came from a place of force, or did it come from more of a place of compassion and resilience?
It was a redefinition of myself, this chapter that had closed. It's not the ending. And I needed to prove to myself that that's not the end, right? I don't have to be an Ironman to find that wholeness. I can find it in other places. And in fact, it has opened up so many doors. But I think, moreover, all I needed in life was what I could carry on my back, and 25 pounds in the winter and 19 pounds in the summer. And I wore the exact same outfit every single day. My shirt got so tattered and it had holes all over it where it had rub marks. And then it was so bleached that I actually turned it inside out to look like it had color again. It was so bad. And my feet in my shoes, because you're stepping through mud all day long, not an exaggeration. And the mud is decayed vegetation that smells like a bag of rotten spinach. And I smelled like that, right? But what I learned in that journey is this is all I need, and I'm enough as I am. And seeing all of these people from these different walks of life that I would not normally have interacted with, and to see the true love, the spirit of human kindness, the sense of esprit de corps, and for all of us to come together around one mission, which is to get to Katahdin, which is this mountain in the central part of Maine, which is the final end of the trail. That's all I needed. And it didn't matter what people thought about me. What mattered is what I thought about me. And the rest of it, we'll figure it out when we get there.
Yeah. The thing I love, well, many, many things I love about hiking, but just coming back to what you've said, first of all, about the hiking community, and there's a lot of oppression and lack of diversity in the outdoor community already. So setting that aside, one of the things that I love about the hiking community is that folks who really love to be in the outdoors, they really are about supporting other people and making sure everyone has a good experience. And not that I like to compare and contrast, but one of the reasons I got out of triathlons is that it's such a competitive atmosphere, understandably, because you're literally competing against other people. And while there are very supportive people in the triathlon community, of course, the thing I love about hiking is there's no competition. It does you no good to try to compete. So that sense of community, and those Hells Angels guys and all the people that I know that you interacted with along the trail, and I want to come back to your blog in just a second, but you wrote about the relationships that you developed in the trail. You develop this trail family, and the hiking community, you really do develop these families and these very close-knit connections. And the other thing is what you talked about in terms of how it just strips away everything that isn't unnecessary. You had a fairly lightweight pack. How much did your pack weigh? Do you know?
In the winter, it was 25, 26 pounds, including water and food.
Yeah.
And then in the summer, it was 19.
Which is very light for folks who don't understand. Like, that's a pretty light backpack for through hiking. And so to know that you can actually survive with just what's on your back and what's in the woods around you and with other people it's very spiritual. It's very empowering, awakening, eye-opening, all of those things. So there's some great lessons that I think you don't have to do a through hike, just going out and hiking for a day hike, whatever it might be. There's so many lessons that being out in nature like that can teach us, including being able to ask for support. and help when you need it, and not being so cocky to think that you can figure it all out on your own.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious, what do you think was your lowest moment on the trail?
There was two, and it had to do with my health, and I was legit worried. The first time I got neurovirus, and neurovirus is you wish that you had food poisoning. You wish that's all it was. It's food poisoning times 10, and the violence lasts for 24 hours. And then you have fever on top of that, and that lasts for about 72. And then you're just exhausted for a week after that. And I just was so alone in that moment, and I knew that I needed a hospital. I needed to get IV, because that day I'd hiked, I think, 23 miles that day, and it was the longest hike I had done. And so I was already starting dehydrated. And so then, of course, any hydration that I had was all gone. And then it got to the point where it was emergency. And I remember trying to drink fluids, and I was able to get a hold of some Pedialyte, and I couldn't hold anything down. I just could not. And it got to the point where I was like, I need an IV. I really need an IV. And I remember I did end up, it sounds a little crazy, but I did hike another 6 miles the next day. But it was the slowest 6 miles. And I just remember just feeling so uplifted by the cool breeze. It just kind of, I think it cooled the fever, and just going super, super slow. I mean, 6 miles over an entire day. But it was, just really, it was beginning of my journey out of that hole, and I knew I was going to be okay. And then the next day I was able to drink fluids and hold down food. So I slowly kind of evolved after that. And then the second time was, well, I've been an asthma patient since a child, but I've since kind of grown out of it. And then I had it while I was doing Ironman because of the chlorine in the pool. I think I developed an allergy to the chlorine in the pool, which presented itself as asthma. But ever since I've been away from training, I haven't had any asthma exacerbation until the smoke from the fires. And I don't know if you remember, but there was 300 plus fires burning in Canada, and it was coming down south. And the big news of the summer was that you could not even see the Statue of Liberty because the smoke was so thick. So I was hiking through that, and I started to see the smoke, and it started to kind of veil a lot of the views. And then I kept moving through Pennsylvania. And then by the time I got to New Jersey, I got bronchitis, which is, I'm a frequent flyer for bronchitis. And lucky for me, or smart for me, I squirreled away some antibiotics. And so I had those on hand. I took a course of antibiotics, so at least it cured the fever. But I really needed the second part of that treatment that I didn't have, and that's to have some steroids. So the inflammation in my lungs still was there, but I kept hiking. And so in New York, I was the jerk who kept everybody awake at night at camp, because I would be coughing the entire night, but I kept hiking. And then by the time I crossed the line of into Connecticut, I stayed at this lovely couple's house. They had opened up their home and picked me up from the trail, and they just were so happy to have this opportunity to share their love with this poor destitute hiker that I'm sure looked like a homeless person at that point with all the holes in my shirt. And so to make it welcoming, she had these scented candles burning. And I walked into that house, and 30 seconds later, I had the worst asthma exacerbation I've had in my life. And so we rushed outside, and my asthma is less in my chest. It's more a bronchospasm up here. And I felt like somebody was choking me. And so the first person I called was my mother, of course. And I remember trying to tell my mom, like, I can't breathe, but I could not say the words, I can't breathe. So I just was so afraid, and I felt like a little girl again, and I just needed my mommy. And it was petrifying. But at the time I didn't know that I was on Medicaid. I should have called an ambulance, but I also knew that that would cost thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars because I'm in the middle of nowhere. And so I was in this position where I needed to have medical intervention. I needed to get a breathing treatment. And, but I didn't have a way to get to a hospital. I didn't have, like, I'm just dependent and helpless. And I don't have any income, and I have insurance, but it's that catastrophic kind where you really don't want to use it. And so we had a plan. And if I had another exacerbation at night, then I would ring a bell, and then they would run off, and then it would be worth it to spend all that money. But luckily I was able to stay through the night, at least in a calm way. She gave me some soup, which kind of coated my throat, and I had to sleep sitting up. And then we were able to drive 2 towns over to go see a CVS, and I was able to get some of those steroids that I desperately needed. So that was like, those 2 moments I think were life threatening. And not having insurance, I think we can go on for days on talking about our system, our health system. And I have such a compassion for people who, I chose this, right? I chose to live a year without insurance. But for those people who don't have that choice, I just have such a renewed compassion for these kinds of decisions on withholding their medical treatment when they really needed it. And to walk in those shoes and to really be legit afraid for my health, that really changed me. It was really scary.
Understandably, those are two pretty serious
Yeah.
situations, especially the asthma one. And
Yeah.
do you feel that your body changed significantly from the start of the hike to the end of the hike?
So from I say the beginning to about probably New York, I was strong as an ox. I mean, I was putting out, if I didn't put out 20-mile days with 5,000 feet of climbing in a day, then I'd be like, what's wrong? What's wrong with you? And I would, you know, it was something had to been wrong. But there were some days where I could put out 30 miles in a day. So it just was like just cruising on those rocks. And I had really sure footing, and these climbs that are really steep. They're very different on the West Coast and the PCT, where you have graded climbs. Very different on the East Coast and the Appalachian Trail. They're not graded. And so you're literally going straight up a mountain. And I could just tackle those like a boss, man. I was just cruising. But as I progressed, and I would say really, I started to notice this deep fatigue that would set in. I think a lot of it started when my body broke down after that asthma exacerbation, and just not being able to get the oxygen through all those states that I was hiking in anyway. And I think that really broke my body down, and it never really recovered from that. So my attitude, just my happiness, was starting to be affected. So it was no longer fun, it was work. And I remember New Hampshire and Maine. Now the territory is, you're literally clambering over like these steep cliffs, and I didn't know how to rock climb, but guess what? I had to. And so here you are. You're either going to go forward or you're not. And so that's when my body really started to break down, and when I started to notice the outcome, and it was only grit that allowed me to keep going at that point. Let's just say when I finished, I summited on September 24th. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that I slept the entire month of October, like the entire month.
Yeah.
I would wake up, take a shower, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm exhausted. I'd go back to bed. Like that was my days because I was like, had that deep, 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 deep exhaustion that just needed to heal after all of those miles and stress on my body.
I imagine it's a pretty bumpy transition, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally to come back from an experience like that back into the quote real world, back to your house and the comfort
Yeah.
of your bed and your dog and all of those things. It requires a real shift again. So what is life like now for you after finishing the 18?
Well, a lot of people talk about this in context of the Appalachian Trail, but I think it also can be said after an Ironman, and it can also be said after any big, huge event where it just siphons all of your energy into one goal, and then you complete the goal, and then now you have all this space, and how do you fill it, right? And so it's a very normal thing for people to feel a depression, right? What am I going to do now? Um, because of my experience with Ironman, I kind of anticipated that. And so I had structured kind of like this plan for myself. So I knew that October was going to be, I forgave myself to have any kind of productivity. And I just focused on healing and sleep and watching movies and reading books and going back to sleep and eating all the things. Like, all the things. Hamburgers were running away from me. They were
Well,
like,
yeah,
no, she's coming.
your body was so depleted, you're going to eat everything in sight.
So depleted.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just need to fill back all those stores and just get those nutrients back. And then my grandmother, God bless her, she touched the finish line of 106 and then died. I mean, what a powerhouse that lady is. She's amazing. And so we had our celebration of life in the month of October, or excuse me, November. So November, December was, a lot of family things and a good time to just enjoy the holidays. So come January, I was full on to look for my next chapter. It's time to get some money again because meanwhile, I'm still don't have income and I still don't have insurance. Although by this time now I know that I'm on Medicaid. So that's really great stuff that we have. Thank you, America. All these years I've been paying into it. Now I get to use it.
Yeah.
So yay us. But so anyway, so I just got an offer last week and gratefully accepted it. I actually was in the position of choice and I had two really great offers. And just what I ended up deciding is really a cool story too, but I'll get to the punchline. My first day with my new job will be on April 1st. My last day with my last job was April 7th. So literally it is 6 days shy of one full year. It's just so poetic. It's just really kind of beautiful. I think it was meant to be. I think this was that inner voice and that drive to do it no matter what. I think that was life saying, you need to do it. And I had the courage to listen to that. And I will always look at this time and nobody can take that away from me. So there'll be a point where my body won't be able to perform. I will be in a bed overcoming some ailment or not even overcoming it, maybe going towards, the next chapter on the other side of what we know is life. And I will always look back at this time and this courage that I had to live in the most vulnerable ways and the irony of what strength that gave to me in return. And I will always be grateful.
Yeah, that was one thing that was coming to me just as you said it, was just that courage to listen to that inner voice, that you saw that map and went out on this very uncertain, challenging journey.
Yeah.
What do you think the difference is between Cris before the Appalachian Trail and Cris after the Appalachian Trail?
I don't need to prove anything. It's so cool. It's so cool. It is I'm in awe. I'm in awe of watching myself from a third party point of view and just seeing how I'm navigating in this new life. And this is so fascinating. So case in point, the last week, just a week ago, I had a choice between taking this big fancy title, a vice president position. I would be in charge of this division and I would be leading all of these things and I would have 300 people reporting to me and I would be the boss, right? So cool. There is no doubt in my mind that I can do it. None. But why? Why? Right? Why? What does it give me joy? And then I started thinking like there was and I don't want to say don't do big things, but in this decision, I was sleepless for 2 nights because there was something about the team that didn't set right with me. I just felt like there was, can't put my name on it. Is it toxicity? Was it competition? Was it somebody's going to be judging me in a negative way? Like, what is it? But I read something about that situation. It would not be a position that would be good for my soul versus this position that I ended up taking is for a big pharma, really cool stuff. But I've been missing the science, and I've been missing the meaning behind it. So now I get to, and I'm lighting up just as I talk about it, right? I get to take a product from the very inception and bringing it all through the preclinical and the clinical and all the way to commercialization. That's so cool and so meaningful. And here's the best part about it, Michelle, is I get to work with people who I used to work in the past. And they have been so supportive. One of my colleagues or previous colleagues and will be a future colleague now, after the interview, sent me this meme of a baseball player hitting it out of the park. That's my colleague. That's who I get to work with. And then my other friend, like we're just chatting. And my boss is he chooses life balance. He's very successful, but he's successful while still living a life that's aligned with his values. And I'm so like, I can't wait. So and honestly, it doesn't have the brag points that I would have been attracted to, right? I can't use this as a big name drop moment and somebody say, ooh, you must be a badass. Because if I did, I would have chosen that VP position. But instead, I chose a position where I can truly feel like as a team that's supportive of me. I'm doing cool things. I'm doing meaningful things. And that's enough because that is what feeds my soul. And I just find it to be so cool because the old Cris would have taken that VP position just because of the title and come what may. Like if that means toxic environment, well, I'm just going to have to figure it out, aren't I? But it's a VP position and ooh, it's going to be great at parties. So it's cool. It's really cool. And I'm excited and encouraged about what other decisions do I have in front of me and where are other opportunities for me to live a life that's truly aligned with my values and in a way that gives me a true joy for living. And how is that going to compound on itself? Because we're just getting started. It's so cool.
I love that you said that we're just getting started because it's this full circle back to the little Cris, right? The little girl who before everything started getting imprinted on her knew that she was enough and didn't have anything to prove. Like this is all before we even, I think, become fully conscious. Like we come out innocent and not having anything to prove, right? And so this whole trajectory, your whole journey, everything that you have been through, that you have shepherded yourself through, that you have healed through, has brought you back to this place that you don't have anything to prove. And you get to go back and do the math and science stuff that you loved when you were a little kid anyway, right? So it's just,
I'm so excited.
It's a beautiful spreadsheet, I know, right? Oh yeah, girl, I love a good spreadsheet, right? Like it's just such a beautiful full circle journey and such a great representation of how when we keep listening to that inner voice, and as you said, having that courage to listen to that inner voice, we don't know where it's going to take us, but we we can trust and have faith that it's going to take us exactly where we are supposed to go. And when we are living aligned with our values, which, we've talked about this, like values are foundational for me. I preach it from the mountaintop. We have to learn to give ourselves permission and space to tap into what is truly important to us, not to other people, not to society, not to family, not to our bosses, our friends, anything like that. What is truly important to us. Then that's when we can really start living life that we're meant to live. I want to make sure that folks know, because your Appalachian Trail journey, like that could have been like a whole episode in and of itself. I have a feeling it could be and is going to be a book. I don't know, not like putting words in your mouth.
Well, I think I'll be able to write a book now that I'll have time with my new job.
Yeah. Well, and the thing that I want to direct people to is your beautiful blog, which is Go Boldly. And you are a fantastic writer. You manage in a very succinct manner to convey a lot of depth and humor and low points and challenges in your blog. And you did a ton of blog posts from the trail, from your phone, which was pretty impressive. And so I want people to go there and read about your whole Appalachian Trail journey, because I think it's provides a lot of entertainment. So tell me where else folks can find you to learn more about you. And let me just say too, to reach out to you for speaking engagements, because you've been doing some speaking engagements since you got back from the trail on sort of leadership. So tell me where folks can find you if they're interested in having you come and talk to their group.
Yeah. So I do a speech, I guess, on a keynote it's called Leadership Lessons from the Appalachian Trail. And I incorporate the boardroom and the trail, and how there's so many different parallels between the two, and how we can use these experiences and lessons that I learned through that journey to really help us to find that leadership potential in all of us. And we do have it, and we can all do big, big, amazing things with the help of others and belief in ourselves. So I've been doing that. And my blog, to your point, it's not goboldly.com because it won't work. The .com, they ran out of those. So now instead it's goboldly.life.
That's right. Yep.
And
thank you.
And then the social media that I use the most is LinkedIn, because of the professional bent. And even on LinkedIn, I have a series on the 7 lessons learned from the Appalachian Trail. And so if anybody wants to go in there, you can go into my story. Just the key is, if you punch in Cris Howard, Cris is a 4-letter word. So it is CRIS, and a lot of people want to sneak that H in there out of habit, and if they do, then it won't pop up. So
or spell it with a K, I imagine, but it's CRIS, and we'll have all these links.
CRIS.
Yeah, all these links will be in the show notes too, so folks can link directly to them. So I am so glad that you mentioned your LinkedIn series. I didn't realize you had that whole series on LinkedIn. So I really invite people to go to check out the LinkedIn, to check out the blog. And again, we'll put all of that in the show notes. I also want to finish up with a lightning round of GenX questions. Let me pull them up here because I never remember them. All right. Fondest GenX childhood memory.
So we grew up on a golf course, right? That was that country club 1970s popular thing. And so we used to, during the off hours, go into the trenches and the creeks and find golf balls that got lost. And they would polish them up. And then we would go on the 18th hole, where all the golfers would have lost all their golf balls, and we'd sell them back to the golfers. We got kicked off by the people who ran the show because we sold it for a quarter less than the clubhouse sold their golf balls. So we already knew about cutting out the competition. And then all the profits that we would gain from this business endeavor were spent by taking our mall. We would buy all the candy and we would sit there and eat it without guilt.
Entrepreneur, I love it. Undercutting the competition.
We learned about supply demand real fast.
That is brilliant. All right. Biggest piece of advice for other Gen Xers going through any transition.
Listen to who you are, your soul. Your soul is your guiding light. That is where your truth is. And if it means that things fall out as a result, it's okay, because when you really are tapped into what you need and your soul is, then you have this sense of power that is limitless, and it's your truth, and it's amazing.
Things or people, when you start to listen to your
Yeah.
truth, people might fall off too,
Mm-hmm.
and that's okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
All
Yep.
right. Favorite Gen X era, 70s, 80s, early 90s, word or phrase or mantra?
Oh shoot, you asked me this and I forgot to think of one.
I hate
was
to
a
put,
kid,
yeah, go ahead.
when I was a kid, this is more of a Southern dialogue, but I used to say, I'm fixing to,
Yeah.
all the
Oh,
time.
yeah.
I'm fixing to go to the store. I think you and I talked about
Yeah,
this.
we talked about that.
And I consciously chose not to say fixing to. I just couldn't do it.
Yeah. Yeah, we talked about that because so just so folks know, like I recognize that I am trained as a lawyer, so I'm used to answering questions on the
Yeah.
fly. Some folks are not. So I always like to give folks the lightning round questions ahead of time just so I don't catch people off guard, right? And so we talked about that fix to phrase, and it was interesting because that's something you have consciously tried to excise
Yeah.
from your vernacular as you've gotten older. It's something I embrace because it fits my personality. So I say fix into a lot, and people are like, "Did you just say fix into?" I'm like, "Yeah, that's the trailer part coming out in me." So yeah,
And I'm proud, damn it.
yeah, exactly. So if you were a professional sports player and they have introductory songs, when they're introduced, what would be your Gen X walk-on introductory song?
I would do, shoot, what would I do?
I haven't heard of that song.
Michelle, I didn't do my homework.
That's all right. Can I recommend one for you that came to me as
please.
I was thinking
Thank you.
for
Save
you?
me.
Classic Journey, Don't Stop Believin'. Sounds like
Yes, I'll take that. That's the one. And I was thinking that too.
with you. And last one, what are you most proud of being a Gen Xer?
My being able to not follow the rules. There's no rules, right? We had a lot of freedom, and we had a lot of we had very little boundaries, right? And so we learned how to navigate within this ambiguous environment very well, and that served me throughout my life.
Yeah. I think a very common Gen X trait. I know I have that myself. That rebel. Screw the rules. And it's really,
Yeah.
I think, coming back to what we talked about at the very beginning, starting to recognize how when those rules, those patterns of behavior, the conditioning, the systems of oppression that we are raised in and that we contribute to without even knowing it, starting to look at all of that and saying, what is not working for me right now in my life?
Yeah.
And having that courage to listen to that inner voice and make that
Mhm.
shift. So
Mhm.
I'm so deeply grateful to you. This was a power-packed conversation that I really hope folks take their time to listen to, maybe even jot down some notes, because I think there are so many nuggets of wisdom that you dropped for folks, and people are going to get a lot out of this to help them on their journey through whatever transition that they're making. So I love you. I'm so grateful for you in my life, for what I have learned from you, from the inspiration that you are, and for spending this time with me today.
Oh, Michelle, we could flip. In fact, maybe if I may, I challenge you, and let's flip the script and let me interview you, because you myself, my friend, are one badass chick that has a lot to share. So if I can do that, let's add that to the agenda, because you are amazing.
I full on embrace that challenge only because it would be super fun. And I think
Be
you would
so
be a great
cool.
interviewer.
And you have so much to share, like having the courage to listen to your heart and to change your career from the DOJ to what you're doing now, and building your own business around your truth, and to even have the courage. And I will always remember how you sold your house without a realtor. Hello. and moved out on your own with no connections in Colorado because you thought it was a cool place to live. Like, talk about badass. You've got a lot to share too, my friend. And I love you so much.
I'm just noticing our conversation earlier around receiving compliments, and I noticed the resistance coming up in me to that. And so I'm inviting I just thank you. I received that fully. So thank you for that.
You're an amazing person. Yeah. And thank you. It's just such a privilege and such an honor to be among your first guests. It's just really cool. You're going to be very successful with this, no doubt in my mind.
It's my hope is that it will land where it may, and whatever it does for people, it does. And I'm leaning into just trusting that process. And just, it comes back to what you said, that just following my voice of this is something I've wanted to do for a long time. I don't know what's going to happen with it, but I'm having a lot of fun doing it. And that's what counts.
We're going to look back at this podcast, and particularly this section of our conversation 10 years from now. And we'll be like, remember when, Michelle?
I'm going to take you up on that. Assuming we still have, technology in 10 years. Who knows?
I know.
Who knows what's going on? Thank you, my love. I appreciate you. I told you that was going to be an epic ride. We covered a lot of ground in that conversation. So I hope that you found some inspiration through listening to Chris's journey, from her struggle with bulimia and body shame, to growing up in a male-dominated family, to not ever feeling like she was good enough and people-pleasing, to finally doing the deep self-healing work of understanding that only when we truly, fully accept and love ourselves and listen to that deep inner soul voice, can we set foot down the path that's meant to be ours, to live into our deepest truth. Make sure to check out the show notes for this episode so that you can find where you can follow Cris, catch up on her blog about the Appalachian Trail, which is thoroughly entertaining. And remember to reach out to me. If you have an idea for the podcast or you want to share how this episode landed for you, I love hearing from people. I appreciate everyone who's been reaching out to me. I read all the emails, all the comments. And if you could take a moment to like, share, and review the podcast, it means the world to me. Thanks again for tuning in. And until next time, stay gold, Gen Xers.